This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. And in a slight change, slight deviation to the usual format, let's talk about one of Francis Rossi's idols, shall we? He has called him his guitar god on the radio. Pretty much every time you mention this man, Francis could probably talk all day. So I thought we would assist in that conversation and talk about the one and only Jeff Lynne. I'm joined by Guy Young, as far as I know, no relation to Quo-Camp's Bob Young, in case anybody asks. And he is a tribute act who does a bit of ELO on the side. He does 70s Mania. He does a little bit of everything. Welcome to the podcast, Guy. Normally at this point, I'd ask how you got into Status Quo. But for this, how did you discover Jeff Lynne?
I've loved Quo about as long as I've loved ELO, but I was growing up, I was mad on the top 20 charts, and I'd kind of write down the charts as Radio 1 was playing the songs, and I noticed, I think it was Rock Aria, which might have been the tail end of 76, beginning of 77, as it was going up the charts, and it just sounded something a little bit different. And then I discovered that most of the band were born or lived quite close to where I lived, so it kind of localized it and personalized it for me, and I've been a fan of Jeff Lynne and ELO ever since.
Because ELO, obviously Jeff Lynne was in The Move in the late 60s.
That's right.
And
yes,
ELO is kind of his project, isn't it?
It actually started as a side project of The Move in the late 60s. The Move obviously had their few years of like pop hits, and then Roy Wood took them a little bit different. Jeff Lynne was in a band that never had a hit record in this country, but was well regarded on the live circuit, and they were called the Idle Race. And Roy and Jeff were friends anyway. It started as a side project. To start off with, Jeff joined The Move for like the last couple of years of The Move's existence. And the band members of ELO and The Move were the same. And The Move signed a big record contract, which basically paid for ELO's first album. The very first ELO album, you could hear Roy Wood all over it. Jeff Lynne was doing a lot of the lead vocals, and he was writing the songs. But Roy Wood was a big part of it. There's a lot of conjecture over what happened. They are still good friends, so it wasn't anything serious. But before the second album got released, Roy departed, and then he moved into kind of the glam rock side of it and did Wizard, which obviously was very successful. And Jeff Lynne carried on with ELO, and then it kind of built up from there.
I think the confusion with me is because of the later years where it's Jeff Lynne's ELO, and you kind of associate only really him with that, especially as he re-recorded some of those songs in recent years. And to be honest, it didn't sound any different to the original in some cases. But that is the genius of Jeff that I'm sure that we shall get onto in a moment, because he produced material for other artists as well, including obviously members of the Travelling Wilburys, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, also a little bit later on as well, Del Shannon in his last album, the Beatles, obviously. Are you a fan of Jeff's production work?
Oh, very much so. He's got a sound. He's got like the first thing you notice, as I'm such a music nerd, the first thing you notice is the drum sound. You can always tell a Jeff Lynne song by the drum sound, the gate he puts on it, and just kind of, that's the only way I can put it, the gate he puts on it and the compression he puts on it. And then you notice the guitar sound that he puts on. He's actually done, when his original version of ELO kind of stopped touring, which was the late 80s, he was asked to do something with George Harrison. And that was the first thing he did. And it was meant to be his album. And then they had to work on a B-side, and the B-side became Handle With Care, which was the Travelling Wilburys debut single.
Yeah.
And it kind of all moved on from there. But even after that, more recently, he's done stuff with Paul McCartney solo, as well as the Beatles stuff. He's even done stuff with Take That, believe it or not. He did an album with Bryan Adams about 5 years ago that was a very good album. Anyone that kind of isn't aware of the album, have a little listen to it. There's some great songs on it. But yeah, he's carried on doing that, and he was pulled out of obscurity to do a charity thing. I think it was Gary Barlow that tried to persuade him to do the charity thing, just do 2 songs for children in need. And then from then on, he's now kind of done 2 new albums, re-recorded some of his old stuff, and he's loving life.
And why not? Because with that much talent, and you're right, it's a very recognizable style that he's got. And certainly I've noticed that as well, the drums and certainly that acoustic guitar sound. And I think certainly with the 60s acts that he worked with a little bit later, they had that kind of clean electric sound that he encompasses and brings into the 1980s. Now, obviously, you are, among other things, an ELO tribute act. Why?
Basically, because the tribute market really started to snowball in the middle of the last decade, and when Jeff Lynne did his couple of songs that he did for Children in Need, and then he did his Hyde Park concert, I wanted to go and see him, but I didn't think I'd be able to see him because I didn't think he'd be doing a full tour at that time. So then, as I couldn't see him, I thought, let's go and see a tribute act. And I could see bands, but I couldn't see a solo ELO tribute. And as my bread and butter, my main show is called Guilty Pleasures, which gives me an excuse to sing whatever I want, or whatever you want sometimes. I'd been doing a couple of ELOs anyway, so I decided to work on, could I do a whole ELO show? And I worked on it very, very diligently. I got a friend of mine over in Germany to actually record some proper backing tracks for me. A few I had already, and a few I augmented myself, put my own harmonies on and things like that, because Jeff was also big on harmonies. And before I knew it, there was the sounds of a very good show. I was aware of a couple of people that did ELO shows, but one was up in Scotland, and I think one was in Manchester somewhere, and their Brummie accent wasn't right. So as I've got a little bit of a twang anyway, it was quite easy to do it. And I got the voice fairly accurate. I've had a few plaudits that have actually said that it's quite accurate. And then I started from there. I did my first one 2017. Obviously, it stopped a little bit while that pandemic thing was going on, but it's a lovely show to do. It's a brilliant show to do because the songs are amazing
And huge productions as well.
Yeah, and also he doesn't do any choreography, so I haven't got to learn any dance steps, and he just plays. It's great. You thank people and stick his thumbs up and say this one's a banger, and you might know this one, and he's such a modest bloke. It's easy to portray him, and it is a tribute. It's not like I don't do an impersonation as such, although people say it sounds like him. But that's kind of a normal kind of voice anyway. But it has taken off really well. I've played up and down the country. I've played up as far as Carlisle and down as far as Devon. And I do kind of Dover and round there a few times. Down in London, I've been. It's for a Brummie. It's great to be allowed out that far.
I mean, that's such a big sound, though, to convey by yourself, because aside from the aforementioned 4 mop tops from Liverpool, Jeff must be one of the first people to kind of utilize rock and roll and strings.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a few artists. I mean, I'm thinking of like Moody Blues and the Stones and people like that did a little bit of it, but they would do kind of rock and roll or whatever, and they would augment it by adding some strings to give it a bit of extra layer. But what Jeff did is actually made the strings a center point of the music. You know, a lot of the melody would be handled by the strings, and then everything else was round the outside. So it was probably the first time that, apart from the few songs that the Beatles did with orchestras, where the strings were a big part of the rhythm section. For instance, John Lennon described them as son of Beatles at one point, and he wasn't being sarcastic. He was paying them a huge compliment, and I think they've carried on with that.
Certainly, you can certainly hear the influence, and I think Jeff really soaks in a lot of the stuff that happened previously. And Jeff obviously has gone on to inspire other people, including Francis Rossi of Status Quo. You mentioned being a fan earlier.
I saw Quo live before I saw ELO. I'm as I said, I'm a music nerd. So my Quo period, my favourite Quo period would go from kind of downish 75 up to the early 80s. I loved that period. And because I'm a bit awkward, I like some of the ones that other people don't like. One of my favourite Quo songs is Accident Prone.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't like that, but I think that's great. I love it.
I mean, yeah, it's a deep cut, but it's not a deep cut because it was a single.
Yeah, a single, just not a hit. Yeah.
I know. Philistines. I mean, it's a disco song.
I know. Well, yeah, but, you know, what's wrong with that?
Exactly.
It's all about getting people dancing, foot to the floor. And that's kind of what Quo were about, getting people up dancing.
Exactly. You know? I mean, when I knew I was doing this, I was listening to some ELO, and then I go and listen to some Quo, and I think, well, where did Francis get certain things? Like, is there anything? And the only thing I can kind of pinpoint, aside from a couple of the solo projects where there's obviously other strings and other bits and pieces in there, the falsetto vocals seem to be a common factor between the two. ELO songs like It's a Living Thing and Quo songs like Lies, with Bernie Frost doing that counter melody. That seemed. Do you think there's any kind of correlation between the two?
I think very much so. I could well imagine Don't Bring Me Down, for instance, being a Status Quo song.
Well, it is.
It wouldn't take an awful lot, you know.
It's on the on the Riffs album.
Yeah, but it sounds like it should have been, you know, it should have been their song first.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You can hear, you can hear Ships in the Night from Francis Rossi, and you can hear Jeff Lynne all over that.
Definitely.
Well, I can anyway.
Definitely. Well, yes, a lot of people have said that, certainly. And I think it is Bernie Frost's kind of falsetto vocal that does that, certainly. I think that's the one thing that you can take away from it. Jeff is kind of a multitude of different genres, isn't he? Because he's not really pop and he's not really kind of rock. He's sort of a mixture of all of them.
Yes, I'd go with that. His big thing when you hear him being interviewed, he tells a story of when he first had a bit of success, and he played what was a big hit album for him called El Dorado. He played it to his dad, and his dad said, well, it's all right, but there's no tunes. So from then on, he said from that moment on, he knew he had to put tunes in there. And also he loves mucking about with chords as well. He talks about, if there's like a line that's got one chord in it, well, let's see if I can put a few more chords in it without changing the melody line and things like that. He just likes to keep himself interested by, in some ways, his melody lines, he keeps them simple, but his arrangements, he complicates them just to get, and that's part of the ELO sound. It's you can hum the tunes, but you've got to kind of be quite a musician to be able to play them the way he plays them, and the rest of the band, of course. I think that's part of the reason why he enjoys the touring now. Because back in kind of what you call their heyday of the late 70s, when Out of the Blue and all that was out, he didn't really enjoy the sound that his own band made, and he used to use backing tracks. They used to play over the top of them, but he had backing tracks because he couldn't get his band to sound the way he wanted them to. And now with his musical director, Mike Stevens, who's a genius in his own right, they're sounding the way he wants them to sound for the first time. And he's come out and he said that, which is why he's getting ready to tour again. Don't quite know when the dates are going to be, but he's getting ready to tour again, and it'll be the third tour in 5 years. And it's because he can now sound like he's always wanted to sound.
It's a big undertaking. I mean, how many musicians does he have on stage now?
Well, now he's got, for his normal shows, I'm just trying to add it up, 13 or 14 at the moment. There's 3 string players who have been with him for many years. There's 1 keyboard player who augments the strings, does nothing else but the strings. You've got 2 guitarists plus Jeff, bass player, another keyboard player, a very talented guy by the name of Ian Hornell who does, he handles the backing vocals with someone else called Melanie. He also plays guitar on some songs. He comes to the front of the stage when they do Handle with Care, the Travelling Wilbury singing. He does the Roy Orbison bit. He even plays the fire extinguisher on Mr. Blue Sky. he's a very talented guy.
Goodness.
But Mike Stevens holds it all together, and he's as I said before, he's a bit of a legend. He's a bit of a genius.
Have you been to see them in recent years?
I was lucky enough to get to see them 2017, or it might have been 2018. It was the last tour that they completed. They'd started off on another one, but then the pandemic stopped it. But it was very good to see. Very emotional for me because I love the music, but I never thought I'd get a chance to see them live. I saw Quo at the Birmingham NEC, and that was one of the Prince's Trust concerts in 1982. And they recorded that for an album, and they actually, I think Caroline was the hit single from it.
Yeah.
So I whenever people, musos or whatever, talk about, I had a hit record that went to like number 58 in the charts or whatever, I say, well, I was on a top 20 hit because I was on backing vocals among another 9 or 10,000 people on Caroline with Status Quo. And if I dream, I can actually hear myself.
Oh my goodness.
That's me going, yeah.
I mean, my jealousy meter has just gone up slightly. Many fans have just gone up. You had that one hidden away, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I didn't tell anybody about that, tax reasons. But I was 16, and it took about 3 days for my neck to stop aching from all the head banging.
I mean, that gig is significant for many reasons, but for many fans, it's almost the definitive recording of 4,500 times. It's like 21 minutes and 30 seconds or something. What
Yes,
a thing to have witnessed.
it was brilliant. You know, as I say, I was quite young. I had a friend that was a mad Status Quo fan. He was into the more rocky side, and I was into more of the pop stuff. So with Quo, you kind of meet in the middle, because a lot of their stuff is very melodic, but you know, they know how to turn the amp up to 11. And it was great, a great concert to go to, great show to see.
Well, it looks great
very good. I still remember it now.
I should think you do. I mean, that is a very significant concert in their thousands of concerts that they've done. And certainly in the 70s and 80s, that there are people clamoring for footage of Quo from that era, and that is one of the few pieces that exist. So the fact you're on it, I mean, that is amazing. So let's talk about your show, in which you actually play Quo numbers, and that is 70s Mania. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually, any opportunity I get to play a bit of Quo, I will do it. With my the 70s Mania one is the easiest one to put Quo in, but as I say, I do a show which is a general covers show called Guilty Pleasures. In fact, the last time I did that was a week and a half ago, and my second set started with Whatever You Want. And I'd just like to throw one in whenever I can. There aren't many Quo songs that I feel I can do any justice to, but I will do Whatever You Want, and I'll do Rockin' All Over the World. Sometimes I will do Something About You, Baby I Like, because that's a fun one that people will know. I haven't dared go into the deeper cuts yet, but you never know.
No. I know a few Quo tribute bands who have kind of their safe set, and then the one that they do in front of fans at conventions. But obviously when you've got so many different artists to pick from, and it's a general audience, I mean, certainly, you know, how many numbers would you do in a set?
With the Guilty Pleasures show, I would normally play for around 2 hours in total, and I'll split that into 3 sets. Rarely does it last for 2 hours. It usually goes on a little bit longer, because, you know, once I start, I'm a bit like a Pringle. I can't stop. But I'd normally get 30 songs done in the 2 hours, maybe 35 at a push. I try and mix it up as much as I possibly can, because, you know, for every one that wants the Beatles, there'll be someone that will want, you know, Harry Styles or something like that, or a George Ezra. So I try and mix it up as much as I possibly can.
I mean, that's a wide range of styles. That's a wide range of styles there. How do you manage that transition between styles?
I always approach my shows as a music lover. Particularly nowadays, not many people put an album on and listen to the whole album. You know, this is kind of the streaming generation, where people want they want like a playlist, and they might have a certain song, and then they'll want something completely different to follow it up with, and they might go back to the first artist and listen to that a bit later. So I try and mix it up as much as possible to keep people interested, and to keep them there, because obviously, you know, when I'm playing at a venue, it's amazing that I do that for a living, and I'll never underestimate the fact that, you know, it's a dream to a lot of people to do it, and I do it. But I'm there to keep people in there, and to sell their food, or to sell their drink, or whatever they want to do on that particular night. I'm there to keep people in, and I won't be able to keep people in if I'm doing, you know, like a 12-minute long guitar solo, or, you know, doing a 10-minute long aria, or a 15-minute medley of something. So I one of my like catchphrases is that I always tell people that every song I do is either good or short, and some are both. And it kind of keeps people, if they don't like that song, they might like the next one. So I do like to mix up the styles as much as I possibly can. Obviously, if I'm doing a tribute or a genre like the 70s Mania show, they know what they're getting, and they know that they're going to be 70s all night, or it'll be ELO all night, or with the new one, it'll be something Beatles related all night. So it's easier to keep a captive audience then because they know what they're going to get. But with the general covers show, I try and mix it up as much as I possibly can. Something nice and loud to start off with, which is why Quo's a great one to start off with. Particularly kind of whatever you want, because at the very beginning bit, it sounds like I'm just tuning my guitar up, just having a little meander, and then suddenly I kind of go into the power chords, and I like that.
Yeah,
so you're going to get it in tune.
There's nothing like crunching a good power chord. So,
definitely.
You have a website, guyyoung.co.uk. You can go and check that out for all information on your shows. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, one of which is if you could recommend an ELO album for a beginner, which one would it be?
That's a very good question. ELO's greatest hits. No, I would say if you want to get a good grounding of what ELO are about, I would say Discovery, because the ballads are high quality. There's good dancey stuff. There's good rock stuff. And in my eyes, it's the last of their truly brilliant albums.
That's a good answer.
That's what I'd go for.
Yeah.
Discovery.
And you mentioned Quo mid-70s to early 80s. Is there a particular album that kind of stands out to you from that period? Because it isn't the most popular. Most people that I have on here say 70 to 76. Obviously, 75 onwards, we've got On the Level, Blue for You, Rockin' All Over the World, obviously, If You Can't Stand the Heat, Whatever You Want, Just Supposing, Never Too Late. Any albums kind of stick out to you from those?
I would say of those albums, I mean, I'm going to be a heathen in a minute, but I would say of those albums, Just Supposing would probably be the one that I'd have played more frequently then. But I'm going to be a bit of a heathen and say, go for the 12 gold bars.
And why not? And live
one of the greatest hits.
And live at the NEC as well.
Of course, yes. And just listen out for me squealing, the 16-year-old saying something like, ouch, my neck hurts, or something like that.
Well, Guy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Please do come back.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jamie. Great to speak to you again.